Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Pace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, July the 1st, 2021. So, it being July the 1st, I have to wish everyone a happy generic national holiday day, because that's what Canada Day is. Canada Day from 1879 to 1982 was celebrated on July the 1st every year. It was a national holiday, and it celebrated Canada achieving Dominion status in 1867. Dominion status being the equivalent to Home Rule, as it was later called with regard to Ireland. Canada did not achieve full independence until the Statute of Westminster Act in, I believe, 1931. I think it was. Same thing for Australia. But in 1982, what happened was that a handful of MPs decided that they were going to change the name from Dominion Day to Canada Day. Presumably, this was because Dominion, well, it sparks of colonialism, doesn't it? And 1982 was, of course, the year in which Canada's constitution was supposedly repatriated. I see here that columnist Andrew Cohen called the term Canada Day crushing banality, and said that it was a renunciation of the past and a misreading of history laden with political correctness and historical ignorance. Just so. What is Canada Day today? Well, what has it been for decades? Pretty much from 1982. Well, it was a celebration of the immigrant. All of the stories had pictures of immigrants, of course, almost all of them third worlders, being sworn in as Canadian citizens. Here's something funny for you. You only have to be in Canada for 3 years to become a citizen, and you don't really have to be in Canada for 3 years. You just have to claim that you have spent the majority of the last 3 years in Canada. But now Canada is, of course, a celebration of, well, hatred of Canada. There is no other way to put it. Let's see, what does Justin Trudeau, our Prime Minister, have to say? Today we celebrate our country and everyone who calls it home. We also reflect on everything we have accomplished and look forward to what more we have to do. The pandemic has changed our daily lives, taught us hard lessons, and kept us apart. But through this challenging crisis, Canadians were there for each other. Yes, except all of the people working in old age homes who fled in terror at the beginning. That has been memory hold. Oh, yes, we, young and old, made personal sacrifices to help keep our community safe and healthy. Oh, we made personal sacrifices. No, our freedoms, our most basic freedoms, were stripped from us. We put signs in our windows and banged pots and pans for our frontline healthcare workers. I was kind of hoping everyone would forget that ever happened. Here's something interesting. Military terms are routinely prefaced with so-called trigger warnings, but frontline healthcare workers, pretty triggering, especially to those people who've been on an actual front line or near one. Oh, we ordered takeout. Oh, isn't that sweet? And shopped at our local small businesses, except the ones that, had been deemed inessential and were shut down. And once vaccines became available, Trudeau continues, we got our shots as soon as possible so our communities could return to normal. Oh, is that what happened? Why is Justin Trudeau still wearing a mask then in his Twitter avatar? Hope, hard work, kindness, resilience, and respect. These are the values that Canadians have shown in the face of the pandemic. And today we should celebrate those values and what we've overcome. But while we acknowledge our successes, we must also recognize that for some, Canada Day is not yet a day of celebration. The horrific findings of the remains of hundreds of children at the sites of former residential schools, etc., 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 Yes. And what do these findings tell us? Nothing, really. The first one, Kootenai, we don't know what it is, and there's not going to be an exhumation. Kamloops, there's not going to be an exhumation, so we're never going to know. In the second one, there are a bunch of graves in serried rows, which lack markers. Pretty horrific. Yes, it rightfully pressed us to reflect on our country's historical failures and the injustices that still exist for Indigenous peoples and many others in Canada. We as Canadians must be honest with ourselves about our past. How about the part about carving a great civilization out of the wilderness? No, you're not going to hear anything about that from Trustafarian Justin Trudeau. And we must recognize that here in Canada, there are still people who don't feel safe walking the streets of their communities. Why would that be, Justin? Who still don't have the same opportunities as others. Well, why not? In fact, minorities in this country get affirmative action and who still face discrimination or systemic racism in their daily lives. Well, we can't change the past. We must be resolute in confronting these truths in order to chart a new and better path forward. Today, we have a long way to go to make things right with Indigenous peoples. What more can we give them? Most Canadians have no idea of all the gibs that Native people in Canada get, including those who don't live on the reservations. But if we pledge to do all the work, and if we lead with those core values of hard work, kindness, resilience, and respect, we can achieve reconciliation and build a better Canada for everyone. Reconciliation, what we're seeing in Canada now is an attack on the very idea of Canada. Apparently, Canada's founding itself was illegitimate. What makes Canada special is not the belief that this is the best country in the world, but the knowledge that we could be. By what metric, I wonder? And whether it's finishing the fight against COVID-19, finishing the fight, again, this martial metaphor, tackling the climate crisis, or walking the path of reconciliation, I know there's no challenge too great if we face it together. Because the progress we've made as a country didn't happen by accident and won't continue without effort. This Canada Day, let's recommit to learning from and listening to each other so that we can break down the barriers that divide us. You mean the barriers that multiculturalism erected? Rectify the injustices of our past. How can the injustices of the past be rectified? These people who died and are buried, are they going to be brought back to life? Is that what's going to happen? And build a more fair and equitable society for everyone. You see, Justin Trudeau's caught on. We no longer speak of equality because equality is racist. We speak of equity because equity means that the majority is punished for the benefit of the minority. Together, we will roll up our sleeves and do the hard work that is necessary to build a better Canada. Trudeau equates rolling up one's sleeves with maundering about things that he had nothing to do with. That happened, 100 years ago or more, such as this state of Canadian patriotism. So you might wonder how Canada ended up in this place. 1967 was Canada's centenary, and it could be argued that at that time, Canada was the best country in the world, judged by all sorts of metrics, not least of which was the almost complete absence of racial tension in our country. I want to read to you from a speech that Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, gave at the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress on October the 9th, 1971. Why the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress? Well, because the Ukrainians who came as immigrants to Canada in the late 19th century, mostly to the prairie provinces, had a big chip on their shoulder for decades because of the prejudice that they had suffered. And I suppose it was the prejudice of the WASPs against newcomers, the WASPs or the Anglos, if you will, thought the Ukrainians were crude, uneducated, had funny accents, and wore funny clothes. But the Ukrainian Canadians, despite their success in our country, were determined to get their revenge, and so they did. It was the Ukrainians who were pushing for recognition of official multiculturalism, because the new policy, which Pearson gave us, of official, a bilingual, bicultural country, that wasn't good enough. But here's what Trudeau had to say. Uniformity is neither desirable nor possible in a country the size of Canada. We should not even be able to agree upon the kind of Canadian to choose as a model, let alone persuade most people to emulate it. There are few policies potentially more disastrous for Canada than to tell all Canadians that they must be alike. There is no such thing as a model or ideal Canadian. What could be more absurd than the concept of an, and scare quotes here, all Canadian boy or girl? A society which emphasizes uniformity is one which creates intolerance and hate. A society which eulogizes the average citizen is one which breeds mediocrity. What the world should be seeking, and what in Canada we must continue to cherish, are not concepts of uniformity, but human values, compassion, love, and understanding. Never mind that this speech is based on a false premise. It's absurd to speak of a uniformity that existed in Canada in 1971 when there was one province called Quebec, which was French in language, French in people, with their own justice system based on the Napoleonic Code. And I could go on. And I'm looking at a picture of Trudeau's ugly, scowling face here, but more on this. Referring to what Canadian, yes, Paul Yuzik, prominent Ukrainian Canadian, set off a lively, controversial, and influential discussion of multiculturalism in Canada, which already became government policy within the comparatively brief period of 6 years, first on the federal level and soon after in the provinces. On October 8, 1971, Trudeau delivered the pivotal speech in Parliament declaring multiculturalism the official government policy, in which he claimed that although there are two official languages, there is no official culture, nor does any ethnic group take precedence over any other. No citizen or group of citizens is other than Canadian, and all should be treated fairly. And that's how Canada ended up with honor rapes and honor killings and, all that's good stuff. This is from a book called Creating the National Mosaic by Miriam Verena Richter. One heard this term mosaic with regard to Canada for some time. It's fallen out of favor, and quite rightly too. A mosaic refers rightly to a form of tile or to the Jewish religion. But Richter continues, while assuring equality of rights and treatment for all different ethnic groups living in Canada, we don't have equality of rights and treatment for all different groups living in Canada since our wonderful Charter of Rights and Rights and Freedoms in 1982. This statement also, and much more importantly, affirms the equal value of their diverse cultures. Here, Trudeau officially establishes anti-assimilationism in cultural respects as a Canadian core feature. In retrospect, the concept of multiculturalism seems to have assumed the role of official culture in the Canadian national consciousness. This is all the more evident in Trudeau's separation of language from culture in what is now the catchphrase of Canadian multiculturalism, a policy of multiculturalism within a bilingual framework. The post-colonial notion of seeing culture as hybridized underlines the complications former settler colonies encounter when trying to construct a group identity. Only a heterogeneous concept of culture can meet the requirements of today's pluralistic societies. Well, how did they get to be pluralistic in terms of languages and in terms of cultures? Because our immigration policy was changed in 1967, and Trudeau gave us official multiculturalism in 1971. By 1971, and well before 1971, there was a hybridized culture in Canada, English Canadian culture that existed in all of the provinces except for the province of Quebec. Quebec is now officially a nation, or soon will be, but we in English Canada don't get to be a nation for some reason. Let's see. Let's read from this. This is a piece by Riley Donovan and the Council of European Canadians. July the 1st is now Euro-Canadian Resistance Day. Cancel Canada Day? There are strong calls across the country to cancel Canada Day. It's shocking, even to someone like myself, who's paying attention to the attack on Canadian history and heritage for years, that it has gotten to this point so quickly. Canceling our national holiday, or more aptly turning it into a festival of shame, where Canadians think about historical injustice rather than love of nation, is the natural culmination of the anti-Canadian, anti-white, decolonial ideology spread by the government, the universities, the media, the primary and secondary schools, the corporations, the banks, and even some churches. Victoria, Port Hardy, Penticton, Durham, Port Hawkesbury, Burnaby, Wilmot Township, St. Albert, Fredericton, Bathurst, St. John, Cap Pellet, Granby, Westfield, Churchill, and Truro are just some of the towns which have already cancelled official Canada Day events. Some have replaced it, suggesting that on July the 1st, citizens instead reckon with Canada's historical injustices. Nahid Nenshi, who is the simpering Ugandan mayor of Calgary, has said that fireworks will go ahead, but there will be a moment of silence before they start. He explained, rather than fireworks being woohoo, celebrate, we're starting as a moment of silence, and those fireworks are a way for us to really think about where we go from here while honoring those kids. Some of the sentiment is expressed on a popular social media hashtag, Cancel Canada Day. Everyone should go check that out and see the vile, poisonous anti-Canadian rhetoric produced by our opponents. One tweet with 310 likes celebrated a couple of thugs burning a Canadian flag. Another with 1,300 likes charmingly proclaimed, "Fuck Canada." Another tweet celebrated an occasion when a group of radical leftist militants disrupted a Canada Day event, burning a flag and holding a banner proclaiming, "Unsettle Canada." This isn't just about July the 1st of this year, even if some advocates of the Cancel Canada Day movement will tell you that it is. This is about every July the 1st going forward. I guarantee you that from every June from now on, there will be calls to not celebrate Canada Day. Cities will slowly scale down celebrations. Some will phase them out for good. Militant anti-Canadian groups like Idle No More and Black Lives Matter will disrupt celebrations or create their own events to ritualistically recite the sins committed by Canada. The mainstream media will host panels where professors, activists, and prominent immigrants discuss whether celebrations are really warranted on July the 1st. The CBC recently posted an article which featured the opinions of different experts on whether to celebrate Canada Day. But if you read it, you will see that they don't include a single one who actually thinks July the 1st should be celebrated. This Canada Day, anti-Canada Day sentiment is seeping into the general society. Today, I saw on Facebook that a bakery nearby will no longer be selling Canada Day themed cupcakes, and instead will be thinking about reconciliation on that day. They will be selling orange cookies instead, with the proceeds going to charity. In a recent Toronto Star article, and I'll have much, much more to say about the Toronto Star, which is the official newspaper of Hate Canada, Shira Lurie called on Canadians to make Canada Day a national day of reckoning. Only nominally a Canadian citizen, Lurie is an academic who is more interested in American history and politics than our own. A University College fellow in early American history at the University of Toronto with a PhD in history from the University of Virginia, she often writes articles about American politics. George Grant warned us of the danger of not resisting the cultural and economic influence of the United States in his Lament for a Nation. And clearly, one of the results of not heeding his warnings is academics whose chief concern is with America. Well, here's the interesting thing. There was a Canadian culture in Canada into the 1960s, even into the 1970s. But our elite and our political leadership told us it was bad. It was bad because it was old-fashioned and colonial. So we had to get rid of it. And it was largely British. Until the 1970s, Canadians consumed a great deal of British culture. The best-selling books list was dominated by British books. Canadians listened to British music that was not popular in the United States. And Canadians watched a fair amount of British television, normally through the CBC. Coincident with this, cable television was allowed in Canada, which meant that Canadians had access to all the American television stations. And these two things happening so close together meant that there was a void created by the destruction of the old Canadian patriotism, and it was filled by America. And it happened very quickly indeed. The Liberals hollowed out Canada by taking away our flag and replacing it with the generic Pearson pennant, taking away Dominion Day, taking away our common law and replacing it with a positivist law, and then moving on to openly mocking Canada's history. And no one should act surprised by the result. And no one should act surprised when Canada falls apart in the next decade or so, because why would anyone do anything to save a country as wicked as Canada? Let's see. Chris Selly's recent National Post column advanced his opinion that now is a strange time for rah-rah Canadian patriotism. Yet let's have people from Pakistan come here and tell us how crummy we are. How crummy we are. Let's see. Christopher Lash aptly describes the complete lack of attachment to place and identity among the cosmopolitan professional classes in his 1994 book, Revolt of the Elites. Patriotism certainly does not rank very high in their hierarchy of virtues. Multiculturalism, on the other hand, suits them to perfection, conjuring up the agreeable image of a global bazaar in which exotic cuisines, exotic styles of dress, exotic music, exotic tribal customs can be savored indiscriminately with no questions asked and no commitments required. The new elites are at home only in transit, en route to high-level conferences, to the grand opening of a new franchise, to an international film festival, to an undiscovered resort. Theirs is essentially a tourist's view of the world. And speaking of tourists, Jan Martel, Canadian, winner of the Booker Prize, famously praised Canada as the greatest hotel on earth. And he meant that as a compliment. He meant it as a compliment. So let's, I'm going to have more to say about this. I'm going to have a hilarious roundup of the Toronto Star. But let's take a look at the chat. Hello to Dan, Palcasso88, Tricky Who, Metal Mike, who wishes us a happy Dominion Day. Thank you for that. Brandon Smith says, happy unceded territory a day. Metal Mike says, have you watched any of Dr. Brian, Bridle's presentations of the spike protein? No, I have not, but I will look into it. Hello to Me Too, who says, happy KMG Day. Actually, KMG Day is tomorrow. Kevin, you have something on your nose. Yes, it is a blood spot. Okay. Hello to Brandon Smith. And Clownvelt says the phrase trigger warning itself now requires a trigger warning, content warning. Keep up, chaps. Yes, yes. Mea culpa, mea maximum culpa. I'm glad you were on today, KMG, a voice of reason in this idiocracy. Why, thank you so much, Metal Mike. Universities could put together an expensive PhD on training to become a First Nations chief, says Brandon Smith. Well, it's largely hereditary, which is something they don't like to talk about. Typically on Indian bands, you have two rival clans who are at daggers drawn. And the clan which is out of power shakes its fist at the clan that is in power and accuses it of corruption. And then, when the tables are turned, when the outs become the ins, the situation is exactly reverse with them. Oh, they're so corrupt. And it simply never ends. I suppose it's hard not to be a corrupt when you can be the chief of an Indian band in Canada, just near Coquitlam, what, with fewer than 200 members, where the chief earns over $900,000 a year. Jason Quinn talking about Infinite Jest. Okay. David Foster Wallace, is he still a big deal? Jason Quinn says, better to think of Infinite Jest as a collection of short, really short stories. Isn't that Anthony Burgess described Ulysses? Well, I suppose you could look at Ulysses as the world's longest short story. Clownvelt says, forgive me for saying this, but I would dearly love to hear your review of Buck Breaking. I am thinking about it. I think it might break my brain, though. The Ukrainians successfully forced Ontario liquor stores to pull a Romanian vodka off the shelves because it had Stalin in its name. Well done, comrades. It's about priorities. Again, from Metal Mike. Jason Quinn says, I have more in common with a Finnish fisherman. I love how quickly that became a meme. Happy birthday, Kevin. One day too early, but thank you for the sentiment. Dr. Byram, I will look at it. Being a heroin addict is an especially bad life, especially when one is in chronic pain. What usually gets them is either the cops or other addicts trying to get over in order to get their own fix. Well, 3 generations ago, say, heroin was expensive and it was adulterated, very strongly adulterated, and badly so that people were suffering many contraindications up to including death because of the poor quality of the heroin. Also because it requires injection. It is my understanding, I have no personal knowledge of drugs whatsoever, but it's my understanding that heroin is now so powerful and so cheap that one can get the effect that one needed to do IV to get simply by snorting the stuff, which is obviously much safer. Okay, so to the Toronto Star, the top 9 Canada Day essays to read from the Star, and this was published today. Do you feel like celebrating Canada Day this year? I don't know. I think that question is pretty triggering on its own. After weeks of horrifying discoveries on the sites of former residential schools, no, they are not horrifying. They are mysterious, perhaps, but not horrifying. The planet axiom here is that, again, people didn't die back in those days, or they shouldn't have died. Of course, if you look at the statistics for how long people lived and the fatality rate of children under 5, well, you would be shocked. You would be absolutely shocked. Stephen March says, if Canada wants to be healthy and decent and prosperous and stable, it needs to face its demons. Every country is imperfect, just as every person is imperfect. Yeah. Canada's relationship to Indigenous communities, the process of truth and reconciliation, is essential for our own survival. No, it isn't. What are they going to do? Declare war on us? Every former residential school in this country should be a museum. Every school-aged children should visit one. These locations are the very black diamond of our national evil. Hadia Roderick says, we must think about what we need to do to be a Canada worth celebrating. Do fireworks really mean so much to your Canadian identity? I'm suspecting that someone called Hadia is not Canadian. That going on without them is some great injustice. After Indigenous people literally died in genocide, sorry, lady, you do not know what genocide means. Robert Jago, who is a well-known angry Indian, as an Indigenous person, Canada Day celebrates the start of the worst days of our oppression. The Canadian state, the creature that was birthed on July the 1st, 1867, is not something that should be celebrated. Canada Day is the birthday of a child abuser, a human trafficker, a state that committed these crimes itself and that recruited churches to help it. Canada, for better or worse, is entirely a European foundation. The Indians were bystanders. They had nothing to do with the creation of Canada. In fact, they were not allowed to leave their reserves until 1960. Shri Pradkar, who was born and educated to the university grad level in India, and then worked in India, and then went to Singapore, and that didn't work out. for her. So she came to Toronto, and now she lectures us on how horrible we are, and always has been, and is the official scold in the newsroom. She's like a one-woman Stasi there. For an immigrant like me, yes. How about for an immigrant like you, the best thing for you to do is shut the hell up. The meaning of Canada, it keeps evolving. This year, what is there to celebrate? Oh, what a diabolical social narrative to create around a resilient people, stubbornly, steadfastly refusing the logic of coloniality, come what may. Understanding I was in white Canada on stolen land, go home then. Go home. I'm sure your sterling talents would be much appreciated in India. Humira Jabir says Canada's promise of equality needs defending against bloodshed, bigotry, and bad laws. But we don't have equality in Canada. Read Section 15 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We have official prejudice against white people, particularly white males in Canada. Gabor Mate says, for Canadians to be truly strong and free, we must come to terms with our grim past. I was 13 in 1957 when along with nearly 38,000 fellow Hungarians, refugees from a brutal Stalinist dictatorship, my family and I were welcomed with open arms by Canada. The North really seemed true and strong and free. What I didn't know was go back to Hungary. Mark Kingwell, who I recall being something of a craze, 20 years ago or so? Don't hear his name mentioned much anymore. I will fly a Canadian flag on July the 1st for an imperfect nation that aspires to keep its heart open to strangers. You see, that's what Canada is about, the celebration of the other, oikophobia. At our best, Canada is an open and welcoming nation, a place of gathering and hospitality, even as we deal with our sometimes shameful past. We have excluded Jews. We have punished Japanese immigrants. The mistreatment of First Nations can be traced in a continuous line to before Confederation. This land or village or settlement continues to welcome newcomers. Eva Jewell and Hayden King say, do you find these ideas for celebrating Canada Day provocative? Then ask yourself why. For us, Canada Day is an occasion to dread. The rituals of red flags lining residential streets and smog from barbecues giving way to firework fumes, all in the name of national pride, just evokes resentment. Yes, because if you go on any Indian reserve in Canada, you will find that it is a sylvan, pristine place where nature is not disturbed and there is no garbage and no smoke. It's as if the people there were lying very lightly on the land, as light as feathers, one might say. And from the Star editorial board, Canada Day 2021 should be a time for national stock taking. Oh, my grandmother's uncle sat in the first Canadian Parliament, made some very bad decisions. He cannot apologize, so I will, says Janet Trull. Described as a retired educator, a writer and visual artist living in West Guildford, Ontario. You do not have the right to apologize for your grandmother's uncle. And, Mohammed Fakir, are you sensing a trend here, listeners? Should we be celebrating or grieving on Canada Day? Like so much about our country, it's complicated. Yeah, okay. Yes, life is so much better in India or Pakistan. But I'm not, I got to get with the fun stuff here, because this is fun. Trust me. Okay, Justin Reedman, who is, of course, wearing a mask in his Twitter profile, passionate about building sustainable and vibrant communities. I found out that he is a civil servant in the city of Kitchener, and he earns about $192,000 a year. As a settler and ally, I'll spend Canada Day learning about this nation's shameful history against Indigenous people. And there's a picture of him hugging another man. It's been a tough year and a half. Our worlds have been turned upside down by the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of us have had to deal with isolation and a longing to be connected with members of our community again. But with our grief, loss, and fear, we've shared news of the unmarked graves of 215 residential school children. We don't know that's what it is. Found in Kamloops adds another layer of trauma for Indigenous communities and allies. Not even a month later, more pain with the news of hundreds of bodies lying in a former residential school in Saskatchewan. Yes, in an Indian graveyard, there were bodies buried in graves. Shocking, I know. As a settler, my pandemic stress must be a fraction of what Indigenous people have experienced over generations of colonial trauma. Ron McLester, my partner of over 20 years, is from an Indigenous community. He is from the Turtle Clan from the Oneida Nation, which is part of the Six Nations Confederacy. He is also Algonquin College's Vice President of Truth, Reconciliation, and Indigenization. Nice work if you can get it. The day after the news from Kamloops, I was shocked to see that Ron shaved his head. Ron has been growing his hair out for nearly 3 years, and his hair was a large part of his identity. Shaving it was his way of grieving, while having no time to grieve. As Ron was sitting on the side of the bed, tears fell from his eyes. I don't understand, Justin. I really don't understand. Why do they hate us so much? What did we ever do to them? To your ancestors, I mean. What did we do to deserve this? We just existed here when settlers arrived. Yes, only the Toronto Star could turn Canada Day into a biracial gay psychodrama. 2 years ago, Ron went back to his home community for a month-long professional development opportunity. While he was there, he learned that the Tribal Administration Building, the same building he spent primary school and summer camps in, the building his family drove past every single day they left the reserve for groceries or to see a movie or pick up a pizza, was actually a residential school. At 40 years after a lifetime of nearly daily interaction with this building, he finally discovered its insidious legacy. Yes. During this past month, many people reached out to Ron asking what he is going to do in response to the discovery of the nameless 215, and now hundreds more from Saskatchewan. I've realized that it's not reasonable to look to Ron or any Indigenous community member, Indians we used to call them, to take the next step. The next steps are on us. The responsibility is on the shoulders of all settler people of Canada. As settlers, we have a responsibility to remember that we are connected to this history, whether it makes us uncomfortable to admit it or not. It's why I have decided I will not celebrate Canada Day this year. If this clown really believes that he is a settler, well, he can stop. He can start by quitting his job and by giving his property to the local Indian band and then buggering off back to Europe. I mean, if he's really sincere. Here's a contribution to the Toronto Star from Diamond Yao. As a Chinese Canadian, I'm joining hands with Indigenous communities to speak up about this nation's history of violent oppression. Yes, and we truly need the Han Chinese to lecture us about the horrors of colonialism, because the Chinese have never been involved in colonialism, the Han Chinese, not in Manchuria, not in Mongolia, not in Tibet, not in Thailand, not in Singapore, not in Malaysia, not in the Philippines, not in Indonesia. The Chinese have always liked to stick to themselves. I will not be celebrating Canada Day. As a Chinese Canadian who has seen my community suffer throughout history in Canada and who stands in solidarity with other racialized Canadians, Canada Day is a day of mourning for me. Yes, imagine telling a Han Chinese that he doesn't have a race, but that he was racialized by evil white people. This year alone, we have witnessed police brutality against Black people, a Muslim family slain in a terrorist attack. We don't know it was a terrorist attack, and Indigenous residential school graves being recovered after decades. Surge of anti-Asian racism, killed by hit and runs, were coughed and spat on, had garbage thrown at them, their businesses vandalized. Oh dear, 6 Asian American sex workers were murdered in Atlanta last March, and that has exactly what to do with Canada. I am writing to you, fellow members of the Chinese Canadian community and beyond, to ask you to join in efforts to use this Canada Day as a time of learning. Canada, as we know it today, would not be able to exist without our ancestors' sacrifices. Bullshit. The only reason the Chinese were used to construct the CPR is that John A. Macdonald and the Canadian Pacific Railway were too cheap to hire Irish navvies like the ones who built the railways in England. Yes. And of course, she is she has a caricature of herself as her avatar in the Funko Pop style. Yes, with a mask over her mouth, of course. And July the 1st is known as Humiliation Day. She tweets, for many Chinese Canadians, it's when Canada enacted the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1923. Well, in retrospect, it was clearly a mistake to overturn the Chinese Exclusion Act. Because despite the fact that the Chinese have prospered greatly in Canada, it turns out now they hate us. And for the humiliation that they have suffered, of course, no one held a gun to their head and forced them to come to my country. But apparently that makes no difference. Sorry for going on so long about Canada. I know it bores many of my non-Canadian listeners. But again, Canada is the terrible warning to you, to other countries, of following this path, that you might end up with no country at all. Okay, what do we have in the chat? The Toronto Red Star, says Metal Mike. Catholic schools had churches and burial areas all in close proximity 100 years ago. Yes, indeed. The Anglican Cathedral in Victoria is, I don't know, what is it, about 15-minute walk from where I live. And guess what? There is a graveyard right next to the church and right next to the school. Does this mean that for decades, the Anglican school there was murdering children? Is that what it means? No, of course, that's not what it means. Steve says, never admit any ethnic wrongdoing or historical guilt. It will always be abused. Yes, and we've seen that in the United States with Juneteenth. You happy now? You got a second holiday? Oh, I see. This is being used as a stepping stone to demand more in the way of making up, racial grievances. Steve says, an aggressively ethnocentric, unapologetic society does not have these problems, just as Canada did not have these problems until 1967, which was the year that Canada's immigration policy was radically changed, presumably to match what happened with Hart-Celler in the United States in 1965. Metal Mike says, when you finally find what they are referring to in terms of these discoveries is that the radar detected overturned soil. The rest is speculation, propaganda, and sensationalism. Yes, indeed. Hungarians came from the Golden Horde, from the Eurasian steppe, says Birkin Sultanov. Hello to Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator. Thank you for your service. Eminemton says, Happy Canada Day to all Canadians. Well, thank you. I like how Kevin has apparently had it. Well, I grew up in a country which was could be seen as a paradisial in a lot of ways. Not as rich as the United States, but much less division in terms of disparity of wealth. And again, of course, in the 1960s, when Canada turned 100, the United States was being torn to pieces by race riots, and none of that happened in Canada. It was only in the 1980s when a bunch of black people smashing cars on Yonge Street in Toronto was deemed to be, by Stephen Lewis, no less, as Canada's first race riot, and Canada's progressives, tears were streaming. They were streaming down their faces. Finally, Canada has its own race riots. We were so unsophisticated before. So white bread. Hungary joined the Axis powers. Canadians went to war against the Axis. What were Gabor's parents doing then? Were they on vacation? Says Metal Mike. Okay. Gypsies are also not too popular, says Birkin Selton. I've got to be very careful what one says about the Gypsies on any form of communication in Canada. Sorry, Roma. I'm sorry, Roma. What's today's movie? It is Kiss Me Stupid by Billy Wilder, which I am talking about in about 45 minutes. David Dorian says, these are sure signs of a nation under attack by its elites. Your guardians are committing treason, mixing in destruction of the founding race, destruction of the family units, oppressive taxation. I've seen most of his movies, but not the one Kevin is discussing tonight, says Anne Run. Again, from Metal Mike, we have Chinese government agents in all sorts of positions of influence in Canada and the House of Commons and the Senate, not to mention our chief medical expert. Kevin, are you familiar with the controversial comments made by David Henneque in the early 2000s, says Urban Planet? Indeed, I am, because my former boss, Doug Christie, represented David Henneque and was successful in court. Henneque did not like the Jews, not one little bit, and he was not shy about stating that, and he was stripped of something or other because of his comments. Canada always seemed to be much more genteel. America is one rough place, says Birkin Sultanov. Well, that was the general opinion, but of course that's changing, especially in Toronto. Americans used to come to Toronto and marvel at how safe and boring it was. Well, it is no longer safe and boring. Demography is destiny, as they say. So let's talk about something else that isn't Canadian. Okay. And, I don't want to talk about the Beaver Wars. You could look up Beaver Wars on Wikipedia, and you could find out how the Iroquois tribe was determined to swallow up as much of North America, of Canada and the United States as it could. Oh, no, they weren't a peaceful group of Indians living on their own land. No, they wanted to conquer and slaughter everyone else. They managed to move west about, 1,000 miles? William Briggs has a post today, hating that which is evil and fined for it. There are various translations of Paul's letter to the Romans, but while the words differ, the substance remains the same. Let love be genuine, hate what is evil, hold fast to what is good. Let love be without dissimulation, hating that which is evil, cleaving to that which is good. Let love be without dissimulation, abhor that which is evil, cleave to that which is good. Hate is natural and necessary and good. Hate is a Christian virtue properly applied. To not hate that which is evil is to at least lack judgment, and perhaps in some cases evidence of cowardice. Consider the woke embrace hate with gusto. They hate openly and loudly. They cherish hate and celebrate it. Hate drives them. The only difficulty is that, while they are terrific haters, they hate that which is good. To be woke is to invert. To be woke is to sleep. The woke call that which is bad good. They call that which is improper proper. They call that which is sickening delightful. They call love hate and hate love. Yes, again, this is what Michael Polanyi, the Hungarian philosopher, called moral inversion. The woke hate criticism and hate most ridicule and will not abide either. They hate your hate. So they seek to make illegal all hate directed at them. This accounts for the creation of hate crimes and hate speech. Hate crimes are usually ordinary crimes and sometimes no crime at all in which a woke pet is claimed to have suffered. Hate speech is reminding any woke person of reality. Richard Greenhorn reminds us of this typical hate crime. A U.S. judge has handed down a sentence of at least 15 years to a man who stole an Alphabet People Pride flag from a church and burned it outside a strip club. Yes, Canada, not alone, is proposing to fine online hate speech with a $20,000 fine, which we shall see is a brilliant way to stifle political dissent. That 20 grand is for the first offense. It goes up to 50 on the second, even discounting the Canadian dollar. This is a substantial amount of money. And our Attorney General says not to worry, not to worry. It's not going to target simple expressions of dislike or disdain. And Briggs comments, simple expressions of dislike or disdain are exactly what would be punished as long as that dislike or disdain is projected in any woke dogma. Try, for instance, writing, I dislike X, where X is any woke pet or cause that is at the moment newsworthy, or in response to some urgent woke message after the law is passed, and see if that isn't classified as hate. The self-censorship, even from the beginning, will be strong and even stronger after the government steals somebody's money as an example to encourage the others. For as we all know, the slippery slope is not a fallacy, but a guarantee. Yes, this point about self-censorship is very much to the point. After various laws were passed by provincial governments and the federal government regarding so-called hate speech, Canadians found out that ordinary expressions of opinion, such like, I don't like immigrants, they were in big trouble for saying that. I don't want any more immigrants. I want the immigrants to go home. So Canadians have been self-censoring for decades, with the result that it's possible for the elite to say, oh, well, the people agree with our policies. You don't hear anyone complaining, do you? And the reason you don't hear anyone complaining is that people are afraid not only of being fined, and if you don't pay those fines, you go to prison, but of being socially, professionally, and financially ruined by expressions, political expressions, which were really just normal. Just really normal. So, question, where does Facebook end and where does the government begin? Or where does the secret police begin? Or alternatively, Facebook, come for the community, stay for the police state. Facebook tells us, are you concerned that someone you know is becoming an extremist? We care about preventing extremism on Facebook. Others in your situation have received confidential support. How you can help. Hear stories and get advice from people who escaped violent extremist groups. Yes, and once again, Facebook is in no way a publisher. It's just a platform, you know, because if it were a publisher, it would be subject to Section 230, and we can't have that. Fascinating article by Neville Hodgkinson on Conservative Woman Co. UK today. German journalist and author Paul Schreier has produced an hour-long video in which he shows how a war on bioterror was taking shape long before the emergence of COVID-19, foreshadowing and perhaps in many ways dictating the international response to the pandemic. The war gathered pace during the 1990s and early 2000s with a series of high-level pandemic simulation exercises conducted among the most influential industrial nations of the West. The pandemic concerns went briefly into abeyance during the financial crisis of 2007 to 8, but emerged with greater intensity during the swine flu panic of 2009. The outbreak prompted the prominent French economic and social theorist and visionary networker Jacques Attali to make a statement that Schreier regards as crucial in helping us understand some of the ideas and forces that lie behind the current global psychosis, as I have described it, surrounding SARS-CoV-2. Governments worldwide have implemented hugely damaging lockdown and mass experimental vaccinations after the escape of this genetically engineered virus rightly created alarm, but to which the response has been lethally disproportionate. Attali has served as a special advisor in French politics for several decades, counseling presidents, including François Mitterrand, Nicolas Sarkozy, and Emmanuel Macron. He predicted the subprime mortgage crisis that started in the US in 2007, and in 2009 was acclaimed one of the world's top 100 global thinkers by the journal Foreign Policy. When the swine flu struck in 2009, he wrote, "History teaches us that humanity advances in great strides if it is frightened. The pandemic now setting in might trigger one of those fears that cause structural changes. Then we will be able to lay the foundation for a world government, something to accomplish much faster than would have been possible by economic reasons alone," unquote. The Build Back Better? Anyone? A year later, in 2010, a study with similar globalist concerns was published in the US called Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. It was financed by the Rockefeller Foundation. It included a section called Lockstep, in which 20% of the global population were infected with a new virus, and in 7 months, 8 million people were killed. The scenario was described as follows. Quote, a deadly flu pandemic spreading globally and leads to panic. China, with its restrictive approach, is seen as the paragon of effective crisis management. And is widely emulated. Mask wearing becomes mandatory everywhere. Authoritarian control of citizens is imposed and remains in place even after the pandemic is over. Citizens willingly give up their sovereignty and liberties. It is only after around 10 years of top-down rule that people start rebelling, unquote. This is a paper from the Rockefeller Foundation in 2010. Pretty prescient, The anthropologist and writer Karen Harradine has documented in these pages the role of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in helping to fulfill that aim, leading to its becoming the self-appointed leader of the global response to COVID-19. The GF is co-founder and funder of the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, which invests in vaccines and is also funded by the Indian and Norwegian governments, the British-based Wellcome Trust, and the World Economic Forum. Sir Jeremy Farrar, director of the Wellcome Trust and member of SAGE, sits on the CEPI board. In 2017, Gates said that the world was unprepared for pandemics and that CEPI's investments in DNA-RNA vaccines would mitigate that. According to Harradine, the Gates Foundation has morphed into a global juggernaut with unaccountable power. Vast amounts of money are being channeled according to the thoughts, passions, and prejudices of one man with questionable judgment. Gates's megalomaniacal drive to vaccinate the world, whether the world wants this or not, follows a familiar pattern established when Gates persuaded U.S. public health officials to shift much-needed resources from their own country to the developing world. In February 2017, Gates addressed the Munich Security Conference, the world's leading forum for debating international security policy, warning that we ignore the link between health security and international security at our own peril. It was only a question of time, he said, before a dangerous pathogen would spread, be it by a quirk of nature or at the hand of a terrorist. The world needs to prepare for epidemics the way the military prepares for war. That May 2017, for the first time, the health ministers of the G20, representing the wealthiest and most powerful industrial nations of the world, were all represented. And China participated in a scenario exercise aimed at achieving a coordinated response to the threat of a future pandemic. Instead of SARS, the dangerous virus was called MARS, said to have come from a mountain area. In his video, Schreier shows us the real-life health secretaries and ministers watching intently as the fictitious pandemic scenario unfolds on a screen. When we look at that picture, he says, we might comprehend a bit better why in today's crisis, all, or at least most of the countries are proceeding in a very coordinated way, and why in every country more or less the same is acted out. They were given the same general recipes and procedural instructions that are now being realized in a synchronized way. At least this is how it seems to be. The next bioterrorism exercise, once more hosted by the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, took place in Washington, D.C. on May 15, 2018, called Clade X. It focused on the imagined response of the U.S. National Security Council to a global viral pandemic let loose from a biolab in Zurich by an elitist cult to reduce the global population. 2 well-known U.S. TV hosts took part. The stated purpose was to illustrate high-level strategic decisions and policies that the United States and the world will need to pursue in order to prevent a pandemic or diminish its consequences should prevention fail. Finally, a simulation exercise called Event 201 was held in October 2019 at the Hotel Pierre, opposite Central Park in New York. Schreier notes that the luxurious hotel was opened in 1930 by Wall Street bankers during the Great Depression. Delegates included the current directors of both the Chinese and American Centers for Disease Control and former deputy director of the CIA. Dr. Elias of the Gates Foundation was present, along with the vice president for global public health of Johnson & Johnson, the largest pharmaceutical company in the world, and the global chief operating officer of Edelman, the world's largest public relations and communications firm. The scenario postulated the arrival of a deadly coronavirus, and this time the simulation focused on public relations. The script said, quote, "Governments will need to partner with traditional and social media companies to research and develop nimble approaches to countering misinformation. This will require developing the ability to flood media with fast, accurate, and consistent information. For their part, media companies should commit to ensuring that authoritative messages are prioritized and that false messages are suppressed, including through the use of technology," unquote. Charts, maps, and tables were presented showing which countries were impacted and to what degree as case numbers grew, and with projections of how the death rate would develop over the forthcoming months. This is basically just what is happening at this very moment, Schreier comments. This is exactly the same kind of infographics that we are now getting from the Johns Hopkins University. It is the information we are being fed by all mainstream media outlets, and the present censorship by social media giants like YouTube and Google has been expressly advised in that Event 201 just a few months before today's corona crisis. What had then been planned is now reality. Who was planning what? Schreier says all this information taken together provides a crucial backdrop for us to form our own opinion about what is happening. He gives a clue as to his own view by citing an almost unnoticed financial crisis that took place before the emergence of COVID-19. Many people, me included, didn't realize that in mid-September 2019, stock markets were in a panic. It was a liquidity crisis called the cash crunch of September 2019. A news report in the German weekly Zeit Online of October the 2nd was headed "Blackout in the Financial System. The Fed tries to prevent a breakdown of the cash market by injecting billions of dollars into the financial system. How alarming is the situation?" The report continued, "The crisis came overnight. Banks were running short of cash. The Fed was intervening with massive amounts of dollars to prevent the worst. This sounds like the climax of the global financial crisis in 2008, but in fact only describes the Monday of the week before last, when an important part of the global financial system was on the verge of collapse and the general public noticed practically nothing." Schreier checked the Fed's balance sheet and found that in the 2008 crisis, when banks stopped lending to one another, its assets doubled in the space of a few weeks from about $1 trillion to $2 trillion as it pumped money into the system by buying treasury and corporate bonds. This is the process which in effect creates money, known euphemistically as quantitative easing. Subsequent cash injections took the total to $4 trillion by the end of 2017. When you look at that from today's perspective, you realize that the bubble was gigantic, and it became clear that this practice couldn't be kept up, Schreier says. You either had to deflate it or it would burst. The Fed tried to deflate over the next 2 years, gently taking money out of the system, but the fresh crisis of confidence in mid-September 2019 caused it to revert to ever-increasing cash injections. These continued after the arrival of the new coronavirus, with the pandemic now the excuse. But what lay behind the previous interventions? Schreier cites a report by Norbert Hering, a German economics journalist. In January 2020, the Fed explained its interventions with a less than convincing reason of temporary miscalculations, saying it was out of the question that the banks didn't trust each other. The alleged miscalculations seemed to be rather persistent. 4 months later, the Fed's emergency lending is still perpetuated in unrestrained amounts. An end is not in sight. It might be that the financial boom fueled by central banks is in its final phase before collapsing. Exactly how the financial crisis, COVID-19, and the Great Reset famously anticipated by the World Economic Forum are connected remains to be seen. But it doesn't take a conspiracy theorist to see that they are all linked. Klaus Schwab, who heads the WEF, the annual summit attended by some of the world's wealthiest and most powerful people, has said that the pandemic represents, quote, "a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world, to create a healthier, more equitable, and more prosperous future," unquote. But if, this essay concludes, in our real-life scenario, part of the role of COVID-19 has been to stave off an impending financial collapse, further enriching a few while impoverishing many, we can expect a rocky ride to come. And again, this is by Neville Hodgkinson at conservativewoman.co.uk, and it's called COVID's Dark Winter. Yes, so we find out that Tony Fauci, chief scientific advisor for the US government, signed on by Facebook to decide what is true and what is not, what is information, what is misinformation or disinformation. Again, where does Facebook end and where does the government or the police state begin? It would seem to me it would be rather difficult for this front to be maintained. We are the experts. We know right from wrong. We know truth from falsehood. Oh, when we find out that Fauci admitted well over a year ago, COVID-19 could have come from the Wuhan virology lab, only to blast it in public as outrageous. And, well, it was blasted by all the experts, all the good people as outrageous until it wasn't. So whose purpose did it serve to call it misinformation, and whose purpose is it serving now to say that it probably isn't misinformation? This is from Tyler Durden in Zero Hedge. On Wednesday, Bloomberg published the latest in a series of stories effectively restating the same facts. The vaccination rate in a handful of deep red states has substantially lagged the rate in the rest of the country. The lead-in for Wednesday's story was the fact that the gap between the most and least vaccinated states has continued to widen. Though even Bloomberg concedes that on a national level the news appears good, the country's vaccination campaign is among the most successful in the world. One academic quoted in the Bloomberg story, Timothy Callahan, who studies rural health at Texas A&M, warned, quote, "We're going to have countries where vaccination is rare and nowhere close to herd immunity, and others where it's high. We could be headed toward a divided country of haves and have-nots," unquote. They also warned that an analysis last week of COVID cases in 700 counties found that the new Delta variant, first identified in India, which according to Bloomberg is far more contagious, has been found more often in less vaccinated U.S. counties. But is the Delta variant really far more contagious than earlier iterations of SARS-CoV-2? In a recent piece published by The Blaze, writer Daniel Horowitz explains that the existing data suggests that Delta isn't any deadlier or more infectious than other strains. Horowitz described the warnings from epidemiologists and public health bureaucrats like Dr. Fauci as panic porn dressed up as science. And despite the push to vaccinate everyone, including children, do we all still have to wear masks? Well, in British Columbia, our top doctor is encouraging people to continue wearing masks in all indoor places, even though they're no longer mandatory, starting today. Dr. Bonnie Henry say masks remain an important layer of protection until more people have immunity from 2 doses of vaccine, which is nearly 31% of residents age 12 or over have received. How about all those people who have had COVID and recovered from it? We don't know how many people. Perhaps we could test for that before we start talking about how we have not reached herd immunity. But no, better to be safe than sorry, and to suffocate oneself in perpetuity. Some rather disquieting news about vaccinations or experimental gene therapy, more like, from Israel. This is from visiontimes.com. The latest wave of coronavirus disease infections in Israel has raised concerns given that the nation is one of the most vaccinated countries in the world. The new wave of infections is believed to be driven by the Delta variant that first emerged in India, accounting for roughly 90% of cases. Around 55% of Israel's 9.3 million people have been fully vaccinated with the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. The breakthrough cases or infections in fully vaccinated people account for around 40 to 50% of new COVID-19 cases, Professor Chezi Levy, Director General of the Health Ministry, said in an interview with local radio. Professor Levy said that the figure is concerning, even though the numbers are low. The fact that this is reaching vaccinated people means that we are still checking how many vaccinated people have also been infected. And, oh, yes. If you remember the AIDS panic of the 1980s, the list of symptoms describing AIDS, it got broader and broader and broader and broader and broader. And what was the reason for that? So that we would have more cases, so that more government money would be spent. In fact, Tom Bethel, who wrote heroically about the AIDS scam, once said that AIDS seems less like a disease and more like a political program. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. A SAGE government advisor, SAGE being the body that advises the British government, has said that fatigue, headache, sore throat, and diarrhea should be added to the list of COVID symptoms, prompting concerns that this will artificially inflate case numbers. Yes, as older people are vaccinated, proportionally more younger people are having the disease, and they're having a different group of symptoms, according to Callum Semple, a member of SURGE. By extending the symptom list, we'll pick up about a third more cases. By including symptoms that are common for other illnesses such as flu, if a third more cases are suddenly discovered, SAGE can then attempt to fan the flames of hysteria by claiming the country is experiencing another wave of COVID infections. Calling the idea mission creep, commentator Majid Nawaz suggested that adding more symptoms to the list is an excuse to artificially boost case numbers, which will then be used to argue for further lockdowns in the winter. Nawaz posted a Twitter thread in which he explained how including new symptoms would be misleadingly unhelpful, and that COVID numbers are already being inflated because 3 times more people are being tested compared to December. Quote, we are not finding more COVID positives. All we are doing is testing far more people, 3 times more people, to get the equivalent result. Back in February, UK health authorities announced that not a single case of influenza had been detected this year, prompting some to express incredulity at the claim. Well, we all know what happened. What happened was that influenza was subsumed by COVID-19. And another piece from today in Conservative Woman by Paul Collett's 2 COVID deaths this summer and Australia turns into North Korea. As the Australian's Adam Creighton recently noted, Australasia's ill-deserved global reputation for gold standard COVID management has had more to do with Australia and New Zealand being islands than anything much else. Not only this, we were in a good part of the world, the end of it, and in a good season, late summer, when the virus hit. We missed the first wave entirely. A good analogy is Australia's selective high schools for the very bright kids. We make a fuss when these schools routinely produce top results. This isn't an achievement. It would be the absence of excellent results that would need to be explained. Understanding this would spoil the narrative of Australia's multiple COVID governments entirely. Government policy drives COVID outcomes, right? Australia has done what distant islands can fairly safely do. We cut ourselves off from the rest of the world. The wisdom of the latter is far from established, to put it at its most polite, especially for economies reliant on exports of minerals, agricultural produce, and tourism, and imports of people, especially tertiary students and manufactured goods such as vaccines. We halted all but rarely permitted overseas travel, placing us in the company of Cuba and North Korea. We set up dodgy quarantine systems which were totalitarian and incompetent at the same time. These apply to internal borders between states as well as external borders. At the same time, and totally without need, we have imposed the full suite of useless yet cloying non-medical interventions so familiar to Brits and to everyone else except Floridians and a few lucky others who have sane governments and liberal instincts. We have mask mandates everywhere, including outside, and crowd-restricted sports stadiums in the middle of summer. Snap lockdowns at the whim of jumped-up state premiers used to neither real power nor national attention, and relishing it, now they have it. As we speak, 12 million Aussies, half the population, are subject to lockdown on the back of dubiously measured cases in the dozens. To place Australia's predicament in perspective, we have had one death from COVID this year. That was in April. An 80-year-old man who had been living in, got sick in, and traveled from the Philippines. The previous victim died of pneumonia, having had a positive COVID test 8 months or so earlier. 2 deaths since the start of our summer. Yet we have COVID theater on a grand scale, tedious beyond belief, in the form of daily press briefings where no one asks the blindingly obvious questions, a supine, utterly compliant media, infomercials for COVID safety oozing from every media pore. And let's go to lockdown skeptics. SAGE members, stop publishing daily death data, ditch test and trace, end self-isolation, don't vaccinate kids. This is Professor Dingwall, described as consistently the most sensible member of SAGE throughout the pandemic. And this was given in an interview to Sarah Montague on the BBC's World at One, which is a much listened to program. Almost 90% of English parents definitely or probably would allow their children to get COVID vaccine. SAGE modeler, we got everything wrong. Oh, that's a slightly misleading headline because the SAGE modeler in question, Dr. Mike Tilsley, who works as a soothsayer at the University of Warwick, didn't actually say that. In an interview with Freddie Sayers for NHERD, he says he and his colleagues who've been producing models for SAGE underestimated the efficacy of the vaccines and overestimated the extent to which people would return to normal after restrictions were eased. Face masks cause children to inhale dangerous levels of carbon dioxide at 6 times the safe limit, study finds. New research published in the Journal of the American Medical Association has found that wearing a face mask causes children to inhale dangerous levels of carbon dioxide that become trapped behind the mask. The peer-reviewed research from Dr. Harold Wallach and others found that the air masked children inhaled contained more than 6 times the legal safe limit for closed rooms as set down by the German Federal Environmental Office. The safe limit is 0.2%, whereas the air the masked children inhaled contained over 1.3% carbon dioxide. The effect was worse for younger children, with one 7-year-old child inhaling air with 2.5% carbon dioxide, over 12 times the safe limit. The study looked at 2 types of masks, FFP2 masks and surgical masks, and found no significant difference between the two. The authors explained that this alarming result likely explains the complaints from children who wear face masks for long periods. Something about soccer, and I have no interest in soccer. Why is the government making testing for travel more difficult than it needs to be? Because they can. Why have professionals outsourced their decision-making to scientists? Because they're gutless cowards. Lockdown pushes Gap online as clothing retailer announces closure of all its British stores. Yes, I talk about social atomization, and COVID has been a great victory for social atomization because you can get anything you want from Amazon. Why would you actually want to, walk or take a bus or a cab to some place, walk into the store, look at pants or shirts, maybe try a couple on, maybe take 1 or 2 home? Why would you want to do that when you could stay home alone with no one to bother you and just buy everything from Amazon? The outlook for Britain's high street is dire. More than 11,000 outlets closed permanently in 2020, and the local data company expects this will be followed by 18,000 more closures in 2021. The system works. If you want to look at COVID as a means to destroy society, perhaps this, just happened by accident, but it's worked out pretty well, hasn't it? And Alex Berenson comments on this. Solid evidence here that masks may actually be dangerous to kids. They raised the level of inhaled carbon dioxide 6-fold in a short trial of 45 children. younger kids at higher levels, children should never be required to wear face diapers. Oh, and we hear from Chicken Kiev, who, of course, is Talia Lavin, who has been mentioned on this live stream many, many times. And she writes in Vice, how I learned how to cope with agoraphobia. The panic eroded it all. Long, deep breath. Okay, here goes. I wrote about what it's like to be very, very crazy all of the time and trying to hide it and what the pandemic did. Let's see. Please don't make me risk getting COVID-19 to teach your child. Yes, Berenson had commented, please quit. And Talia Lavin had commented, eat shit, you death ghoul. Well, who's the death ghoul? Berenson comments, so this hate-spewing person, Talia Lavin, is a panic-filled agoraphobic too. Yet I am sorry for her. It must be hard to be so angry and so scared. Just one favor, keep your opinions about in-person education to yourself, Talia. I'd hate for more kids to wind up as afraid of as you. Okay. And it is now 5:21. I'm going to be moving shortly to Theater Thursday. Guess me stupid. Are we getting stupider? Short answer. Yes. Yes, we are. Ed Dutton co-wrote a book on this, which I reviewed on the old book club, a couple of years ago. Let's see. What is the title? He has a lot of publications. At Our Wits' End, Why We're Becoming Less Intelligent and What It Means for the Future, which was co-written by Michael Woodley and published in 2018. The Z-Man has a column today, The Kakistocracy is Real. An easily ignored aspect of the Tucker Carlson spying story is just how ham-fisted this caper was executed, regardless of the reason. Carlson is a relentless critic of the regime, but his audience is relatively tiny. His average total audience is roughly 3 million people per night. Even if every night is a new crowd, that is an audience of 15 million in a country of 330 million people. He may be the biggest name in cable news, but the reality is cable news is a low-impact medium. This was always the lesson of the Trump phenomenon. The entirety of the mass media, including the so-called conservatives, aligned against Trump, but he was able to win the nomination and the general election. These are people who are sure they were the kingmakers in national politics. This TV carny comes along and walks right through their lines as if they were not there. Then he turned them into objects of ridicule and mockery by calling them childish names. If the intelligence agencies were what they imagined themselves to be, they would see that Tucker was never going to be much of a problem. They could just ignore him. These sorts of thumbless capers raise an important issue. Our managerial elite is rapidly getting dumber. This is plainly obvious on the military side. Sure, rural peasants armed with Russian surplus were able to defeat the U.S. Army in the 1960s, but that theater negated the primary American advantage at the time. Armor and advanced transport are useless in a jungle. Air dominance is not terribly effective against guerrilla tactics in urban and jungle conditions. In Afghanistan and Iraq, the U.S. military could exploit every technological advantage against a poorly equipped and trained opponent. In Afghanistan, the U.S. faced off against a Bronze Age opponent. After 2 decades, the white flag has gone up and the Taliban will take over this autumn. In Iraq, a ragtag force of insurgents led by a cleric came close to defeating the U.S. Army. The final peace looked more like a concession by the U.S. as Iraq is now an Iranian client. The gross incompetency of the military is not unique. The entire managerial class is suffering from a rapid decline in intelligence. The truth is, the system evolved for an adult population of the last century. It reflected the demographics of the population as a whole, but also the demographics of the ruling class. Over the last couple of generations, the people taking up position in the system are significantly dumber, reflecting the changing demographics of the country. This IQ decline will only become more acute in the next decade. The great baby boomer retirement will hit the civil service harder than the dreaded private sector because the civil service is much older. The average age of the private workforce is roughly 35. Similarly, the average age of the government workforce is 50. The leadership class is even older. In other words, the people running the system are geezers, not long for the world. This is most stark in politics. Joe Biden is so old. How old is he? He has been in office longer than most people have been alive. The leadership of both parties is close behind. Pelosi, Schumer, McCarthy, Hoyer, and McConnell reflect the sensibilities and the mating decisions of the disappearing past. Their replacements, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Tim Scott, and so on, reflect the rapidly approaching future. Repeat this throughout the civil service and you see the problem. The kakistocracy is real. This decline in IQ is evident in the current upheaval. The great progressive awakening of the 1950s and 60s was driven by idealism. They really thought they were going to create a better world. It was also driven by a big change in the ruling class. Jews had taken up positions in the post-war ruling elite. They were making their mark by leading many of the cultural revolutions like civil rights. Self-interest played a role, but social justice has always been a part of the Jewish cultural outlook. Today, the revolts we see look like a cargo cult. They are reenactors playing parts they heard about in school. They think if they can replay the events of the past will come alive and the great do-over begins. They are led by a carnival of simpletons and lunatics who mostly like smashing things and making noise. Antifa and BLM are the short bus passengers in the story of street activism. None of what we are seeing makes any sense or has any point. It's just mayhem for the sake of it. The institutions of a society are the tools of the people running the society, designed for their use over the course of time. The institutions of America were made for people a full standard deviation smarter than today's rulers. Those tools were also created with certain cultural assumptions missing from the current class. The next generation of rulers are the opening scenes of 2001: A Space Odyssey compared to the men who created the tools used to run the empire. It will not run well. Well, if you don't believe that we're stupider than we were in the recent past, go back, say, just to the 1960s or the 1970s. Look at the list of the highest grossing films then and now. Look at the list of the most popular books then and now. Look at the best-selling records then and now. We are stupider because of an immigration policy which is blatantly dysgenic, and we are stupider because of a welfare system whose effects are willfully dysgenic. And there's also the problem that the most intelligent women in our countries have decided to pretty much give up having children. And, yes, speaking of idiocracy, this is from Thomas Lifson, an American thinker. A genuine nightmare is brewing for Democrats as the laughably incompetent administration of last week's primary election for mayor of New York City proves the need for election integrity measures being demanded by Republicans. Yesterday, the frontrunner for the Dems nomination sued and invited the other candidates to join as litigants. From the New York Post, Eric Adams filed a preemptive lawsuit Wednesday to ensure a fair and transparent election process after the Board of Elections botched the June 22nd primary outcome by accidentally including test results in the vote count, leading to 135,000 extra ballots. But that can't happen in the United States. All of that's disinformation. I think Eric Adams and anyone who even mentions him should be banned from all social media, because we all know that American elections are they're free and they're fair, and there's no corruption, and there's no incompetence, and there's no botching. Let's see, for Newsbusters, NBC's Today Show showed a scant 31 seconds, and CBS This Morning mirrored that with just 32 seconds of coverage of this scandal. In total, these three morning shows are 6 hours long, but allowed just 63 seconds. GMA devoted 3 minutes and 1 second to whether pot customers are getting ripped off by low levels of THC in their marijuana. So clearly, there was time available for an actually important story. Well, come on. This is no accident, because people find out about what has happened in New York. They're going to say, maybe what Trump was saying is not all that ridiculous after all. Ew, Sue. Okay. Oh, I just want to alert listeners, viewers, to an interesting story at theamericansun.com by Sam Dexter called Is Dating Hell? And it's his thoughts on a book by Billy Pratt called Welcome to Hell. His book is a journey through the contemporary dating world and an anti-hero's journey. It is sad, it does build with pain, and for every moment where things look promising, you wait for the stomach punch to end the phase in his life or new hope-filled relationship. Built up over years, you begin to wonder if the narrator is trying to capture the moments as they happen, or looking back trying to solve where he made mistakes. If I had only done this or that, I'd be happily married with a family and the Cape Cod-style home. The cover using Casey Anthony seemed so appropriate. Casey is not just a reasonably cute young woman with a coy smile for the cover, a blog banner, or even a Twitter profile pic. She was and is so much more. Casey Anthony has a chapter here because all men dating since the 90s have run into a Casey. Cute, charismatic, and with a child, she's crossed all our paths. Some date her because the allure is there, and some others warn others not to date her because of everything else. Other people cover for a Casey's mistakes. It's the cute looks and expectations of recovery that are long gone in this new hell. She's never recovering because she doesn't have to do so. The final cover-up was not just her parents working with her defense to spare her jail, despite her murder of their grandchild. It was a jury hearing all of the details, all of the lies, and still letting her walk. It was a national approval of all female misdeeds in the sacred structure of our legal system, a get-out-of-jail-free card for all those partying single moms, because we all know a Casey. She'll clean up if we give her one more chance. Despite this infamy, gossip sites run blinds that men pay for time with her. We all know and tacitly approve. So, a final look at the chat before I move on to Theater Thursday. I used to DM Billy Pratt on Twitter. Cool dude, but don't like his dating stories, though, says Tiki Roulette. Don Willis says, I pulled out my harpoon out of my CDC bandana. Okay. If the most intelligent women have decided to give up on having children, how intelligent are they? Says, yo, mama. Well, there's different kinds of intelligence. I'm thinking of the kinds of intelligence that are measured by IQ tests and postgraduate degrees. Instant gratification is compatible with higher level cognition. Well, yeah. Okay, but when you look at the very highest level IQ, you look at the 150 plus IQ, the kind of two-male brain that Simon Baron Cohen has written about, you run into their gratification. I have thought of something clever, about you or your situation or whatever, and they blurt it out, notwithstanding the fact that this may, hurt the feelings of the person who hears it, or might lead that person not to want to have anything to do with you anymore, or might end up with you, say, being punched in the face. But they just can't seem to stop themselves. Now, Don Willis has a Jimmy Webb adaptation for us. I am a jab man for the county. I've axed along the main roads, searching everywhere for another virus load. Yeah, I'm not as good a singer as Glenn Campbell was, but I'm sure you're not surprised. So let's talk about a very controversial movie from 1964, and it's called Kiss Me Stupid, and it is directed and produced by Billy Wilder, and it is written by Billy Wilder and his long-time partner, I.A.L. Diamond, who was known as Is Diamond. I've talked about Billy Wilder before. He's one of the greatest filmmakers. He comes from Austria. He moved to Berlin. He worked as a reporter. He did all sorts of things. I suppose you can say that his filmmaking career goes back as far as 1926, where he, sorry, 1929, where he took part. He was one of the writers of a kind of semi-documentary, which is called Menschen am Sonntag, People on Sunday, which, according to Wikipedia, follows a group of residents on a summer's day during the interwar period. A lot of very famous, subsequently very famous people worked on this film, including Edgar Ulmer, Robert Siodmak, and Kurt Siodmak. And you can find it. It's available through Criterion, and it is it's quite entertaining and informative, I must say. So Wilder left. He left Germany in 1933, well, for the obvious reason, after a brief period in Paris, where he made a film. He moved to the United States and started as a screenwriter, and his success was assured with his script for Ernst Lubitsch's Ninotchka, starring Greta Garbo. And Wilder admired Ernst Lubitsch more than any other filmmaker. He had a banner placed over his doorway which said, what would Lubitsch do? Wilder also wrote the terrific film directed by Howard Hawks, along with his then screen partner Charles Brackett, called Ball of Fire, starring Gary Cooper and Barbara Stanwyck. Absolutely delightful film. And after The Major and the Minor, which starred Ray Milland, his first directorial effort in the United States, Ray Milland and Ginger Rogers, he made Double Indemnity, which made him a directorial star. So Wilder had quite a run in the 1950s that he made, Sabrina in 1954, and Something Like It Hot in 1959, The Apartment, which is one of the most beloved movies ever made, in 1960. He had broken his partnership with Charles Brackett and moved on, as I said, to Is Diamond. Many people think that the movies that he made with Brackett are a class better than the ones he made with Diamond. I think there are pros and cons in both combinations. The film he made after The Apartment, 1, 2, 3, I think is quite good, actually. I mean, James Cagney is in it, and he's tremendous. Unfortunately, Horst Buchholz is in it, and chewing up the scenery simply doesn't describe how bad Horst Buchholz is in that film. Irma la Douce with Shirley MacLaine and Jack Lemmon was a big hit, and it's about prostitutes. And Kiss Me Stupid, well, is about a prostitute, a hooker with a heart of gold. Yes, that cliche. It's one that I'm rather tired of, and have always been tired of, because it is obviously so removed from reality in a way that is damaging. I will say, though, that Kim Novak, who plays Polly the Pistol, it's not made explicit that she's a prostitute. Oh, she's a cocktail waitress. Yes, and apparently customers of the Belly Button, which is a squalid bar, they have their favorite cocktail waitresses, and it is said that there is love for sale. All of this was to try to avoid the condemnation of the Catholic League of Decency. Cuts were made, but it failed. The Catholic League of Decency condemned the film. As to why this film got such bad reviews, I was looking at a bunch of reviews, and I thought, okay, I don't have very many original insights. And surely what I'm going to tell you now is not an original insight. The reason that the critics hated Kiss Me Stupid so much is that it makes explicit how close show business is to prostitution. That people will do anything or almost anything to succeed in show business, that they will sell their souls, they will sell their bodies. And this is what we see in Kiss Me Stupid, which is it's an adaptation of an Italian play, The Dazzling Hour, which was filmed as Wife for a Night. I quite like this film. Now, it's been reevaluated because almost every film has been reevaluated. People now say that Heaven's Gate was a wonderful film. Yeah, they do. I can see, to younger people, well, anyone younger than me, because I was, 9 years old when this film came out, it's a vanished world, really. But of course, after Swingers, the old swinging world, the old hip world, the old ring-a-ding-ding world suddenly became hip again. And this movie stars, I suppose, the biggest hipster, or one of the biggest hipsters of his time, Dean Martin, who plays a singer called Dino. Now, you say, how hard can it be to play yourself? Well, there's some people who can't do it. There's a lot of people who can't do it. And Dino is not exactly Dean Martin. Dean Martin was one of the most popular entertainers in America for a couple of generations. He had 23 top 30 hits. One of the most successful nightclub performers ever. He appeared in a great many movies and won good notices, all despite the fact that he was a falling down drunk. Well, he wasn't a falling down drunk because you can't be anywhere near as successful as Dean Martin was by being a falling down drunk. Dean Martin's real addiction was to sex. And so it was rather brave of Dean Martin to play a character who was much like him, and, falling down drunk and lecherous and really unbearable, while still, maintaining the kind of charm that would make someone as popular as Dean Martin was. So here's the gag. The film is set in a small town, 2,500 people or some such, in Nevada, called Climax. Yes, this is a movie about sex. It turns out there are several towns in America called Climax. Just to explain, the time that this movie was made, it was released on December 22nd, 1964. It was clear that the old morality, if you want to call it that, was seriously fraying at the edges. That it seemed that there was just behind the curtain, there was a completely different world there. And the curtain kept being pushed outward and outward and outward. Such was the stress. Such was the desire to knock down all the old shibboleths and to usher in a new paradise of sexual freedom. So we get this strange tension where things are ostensibly respectable, but everyone knows that they're not, that people are, sniggering, that double entendres are the order of the day. And my word, this film is rife with double entendres. So we have Orville J. Spooner, who is a piano teacher, and he also plays the organ at the church. And he is not very happy being a piano teacher. He has a friend named Barney, who is a mechanic at the Shell station across the street from where Orville lives. And he also owns and drives a tow truck. Well, he writes lyrics. And Orville Spooner writes tunes, original tunes. And so they have formed an act, a partnership. And one of the things that is really nice about this movie, well, it's the music. The original music is written by Andre Previn. This was before he became such a big conductor or even a composer. I suppose he was more known as a jazz man at that time. And the score features several original songs by George and Ira Gershwin. Well, how could you get original songs given how long ago Gershwin died before this movie was made? Well, his brother, Ira Gershwin, the lyricist, was persuaded by Billy Wilder to find some fragments and to write words for them. And one is reminded just how good Ira Gershwin was at this sort of thing. Really good indeed, I must say. A lot of the songs are designed, they're deliberately stupid, okay? And I'll give you an example, but you can understand the craftsmanship there. Here's a song. I'm a poached egg. I'm a poached egg without a piece of toast, Yorkshire pudding without a beef to roast. I'm a haunted house that hasn't got a ghost. When I'm without you, I'm a mousetrap without a piece of cheese. I'm Vienna without the Viennese. I'm Da Vinci without the Mona Lisa. And Ray Walston and our Spooner, that is, and later Dino, they howl at this. And Cliff says that's what makes it, the irregularity, that unexpected little twist. And he's right. He is absolutely right. I mean, one really has to admire the rhythms and the rhymes of Gershwin. But this regularity, this endless regularity, becomes rather oppressive after a while. There's this tension in this film between the art and the reality, because you have these Gershwin songs which are about love. This is wonderful. That's the song that begins the film with Dino singing in Vegas. And so you have these lovely sentiments about love, and who is responsible for them? People, people like a Spooner and Barney. That at that time, to get ahead in showbiz, you had to write about love. And, all that would change. Well, it started to change in the 1950s, a song like Hound Dog or whatever, and then in the 1960s, where the art of lyric writing, no one was interested in that now because it was artificial. It wasn't authentic. I've never heard anything bad about George Gershwin. Everyone seemed to like and admire him. But the music business is a very, very tough business. And one of the running gags in actually the business of the irregularity becomes a running gag in the film. One of the other running gags in the film is that let's see, let me just get the cast here. Cliff Osmond, who plays Barney, who is just really good in everything that he does. He knows so much about show business. He knows how many songs that Irving Berlin wrote before he had his first big hit, Alexander's Ragtime Band. He knows how many copies all of these songs have sold. He knows about royalties and all this sort of thing. I rather suspect that he was one of the influences for David Mamet's film State and Maine, where you have this, idyllic town in Vermont where everyone is speaking authoritatively about the ins and outs of movie studios. We have this songwriting team, and they haven't been able to sell any songs. And then a miracle happens. That Dino, on his way from Vegas to LA, has to take a detour through Climax, and his really gorgeous car, which is a Gia Duo, a car that was made for only about 2 years. It was very, very expensive. There's no other car that looked like it. He has a little problem when he pulls into the gas station, which of course is run by Barney, and Barney recognizes him and sees the opportunity of a lifetime. Now, one of the things I noticed in this film is that all the product placement, and clearly this product placement wasn't paid for. You couldn't get away with that in a movie. You know, there is so much shell in this movie, you know, after the, gas company, that you think it's an advertisement, only it's not a very good advertisement for Shell when a mechanic working at a Shell station deliberately disables a customer's car, which is what he does to Dino's car. And it's very simple. He simply disconnects the fuel line so that he runs out of gas about a mile later and has to be towed back. So, well, they've got him, and where's he going to stay? Well, how about Orville's house? There's a spare room there. Well, the idea is that they will showcase their songs, and Dino will be swept away, and he will agree to buy one or more of them, and their fortunes will be secured. There's a problem there. That our hero, Orville, has a wife, Zelda, played by Felicia Farr, who I talked about in an earlier Theater Thursday, because she is in Charlie Varick, one of my favorite films. This is a problem, a big problem with the film, the casting of Ray Walston, who some of you might remember from My Favorite Martian or Mr. Hand at Fast Times at Ridgemont High. He was a big Broadway star, and he was in Damn Yankees and all sorts of other things. Peter Sellers was supposed to play the role. And the story goes that 3 months into shooting, Peter Sellers had a series of mini heart attacks, a baker's dozen supposedly, and had to quit the film. I wonder about that, because we now know that Peter Sellers had supposedly suffered an accident of some kind while he was preparing to play the Slim Pickens role in Dr. Strangelove. He was already playing 3 roles. The idea was, wow, we'll make him play 4. Well, he simply decided he didn't want to play 4. And I rather think that Peter Sellers, out in the desert there, 29 Palms, simply decided he didn't want to be in this movie. Peter Sellers, of course, famously walked off the set of the original Casino Royale. He was well known for doing that sort of thing. Anyway, Jack Lemmon was unavailable or didn't want to do it, perhaps because Felicia Farr was his wife. And so they got Ray Walston. And Ray Walston he's not a charming man. He's not a good-looking man. He's not a charming man. He is exceedingly annoying. He is pretty much unbearable. And Felicia Farr is, a knockout. So you have to ask yourself the question, how could someone like Ray Walston snare some woman like Felicia Farr, who is not only pretty and busty, but also has a really fine personality? And one's heart goes out to her for putting up with her husband, whose jealousy can barely be measured on any known scale. Physically attacking a 14-year-old boy, a literally pimpled 14-year-old boy who is, gormless into the bargain, accusing him of having an affair with his wife or tempting to every man in town, including the dentist, Dr. Sheldrake, who was played by the great voice artist Mel Blanc. Yes, every man apparently wants to sleep with his wife. So he has to get her out of the house. But the idea is, this is the central gag. And Billy Wilder always formed his movies around the gag. The gag is that Orville Spooner is going to pimp out his wife to Dino so that Dino will buy a song or two from him and Barney. But he doesn't want to pimp out his wife, so he has to arrange for a fake wife to pimp out. And that turns out to be Kim Novak, Polly the Pistol, at the belly button. So she is offered the grand sum of $25 for an all-night job, and $25 back in 1964 would be worth, I don't know, $300 or $350 today. And so Ray Walston gets her to dress up as his wife, and a funny thing happens is that Ray Walston falls in love with Kim Novak. And, well, what man wouldn't fall in love with Kim Novak? I don't know that I've ever seen in a movie a woman show such a combination of innocence and sensuality. I mean, you could say that her hip swinging and the like of it is exaggerated as Marilyn Monroe's was, but there's a there's sort of a knowing quality in Marilyn Monroe, despite her squeaking voice and her, seeming idiocy. And you don't get that in Kim Novak in this movie. And so Ray Walston is entranced with the idea of Kim Novak as his fake wife. And Kim Novak is entranced with the idea of being married to Orville Spooner, which is a very strange desire to have. But her character, Polly, wants domesticity because she's never had domesticity, and she thinks that she will never get it. And of course, we have this tremendous tension because now that Ray Walston has fallen in love with his fake wife, he doesn't want his fake wife. He doesn't want to pimp out even his fake wife to Dino. Dino does not show himself very well during the party that Ray Walston has put on for him and fake wife, the Pistol. He is no subtlety to that man's approach. It's just grab and grab and grab and grab. And as I say, a brave performance from Dean Martin, because, people have a tendency to confuse actors with their fictional roles, and this tendency is very strong when one is essentially playing one's self. So Ray Walston has to get his real wife out of the house, and he has to become grossly insulting in order to do so. And as much as I enjoyed this movie, I find that Zelda, Felicia Farr's part, to be the most difficult to swallow. Because, first of all, for the problem of why on earth would she marry Orville? And secondly, there is nothing that she has done to warrant the kind of gross humiliation that she is subjected to in this movie. I mean, I suppose it might have been possible to conjure up a situation where this would be a, overall an outstanding woman, but, she was going through a bad period, no pun intended, and it become kind of insufferable. But no, she just sweetly puts up with all of Ray Walston's nonsense throughout the movie. And of course, the payoff to the gag is that Zelda, Felicia Farr, falls into Kim Novak's role of Polly the Pistol inadvertently. It's, it's an old cliche, just it's the hooker with the heart of gold, that, I don't know, you give a woman has a couple of drinks and she's up for anything because she's completely lost her mind. No use looking at verisimilitude in this sort of thing, because the point is to set up gags, and there's an awful lot of gags in this film. And you know, a lot of the gags are really corny jokes, but the way that they're delivered by Dean Martin and the context of the joke makes them quite funny. And Ray Walston simply, well, there's a scene at the beginning of the film where Dino is doing his stand-up act, as it were, in Vegas, and everyone is just rolling around on the floor, and the waiters are just laughing convulsively. And there's one waiter who's not laughing for some reason, and we're all looking at him. Why aren't you laughing? Everyone else is laughing. A lot of people have called this film misogynist. It seems to me that rather misses the point, because the women in this film come off quite well. The men in this film do not. All of them. They're awful. But as I say, if you want to get ahead in show business, often you have to do bad things. I'm reminded that Paul Schrader was once said in a commentary that he was often asked the question whether Hollywood made people bad, and he said, "I don't think so. I think that bad people go to Hollywood in order to be bad. That is to say that show business selects for bad people because of the nature of the things that is necessary to do in order to succeed." This movie really benefits a lot from a lot of location shooting in the desert in California. The cinematography, quite impressive, I believe. Cinematography by Joseph Lachelle. And I really have to commend the set decoration in this film, that all of the locations really look lived in. Attention to detail. We see Ray Walston, and you may have seen a picture of him, and he's wearing a sweatshirt, a gray sweatshirt that has a big picture, a silhouette of Beethoven on it. And there's another gag where later on we find out that he has sweatshirts, same colors, same design of both Bach and Brahms, the three Bs, And then we look around his music room, and then we see that he has portraits not only of Beethoven, but of Schumann and Rachmaninoff and Liszt and Debussy. So, it's the attention to detail always impresses, and this movie has that in spades. But if you were looking for one reason to watch this movie, I would have to say it's Kim Novak, because her performance in this was an absolute revelation to me. I mean, it's really heartbreaking. And, as I say, hooker with a heart of gold. Don't like that cliche, never have. But she wins me over in this film. So those are my thoughts on Kiss Me Stupid. Let's see. Star Rover says Kim Novak avoided Marilyn Monroe's fate by going into semi-retirement in her early 30s when she was a big star. Ray Walston's character in Kiss Me Stupid may be one of the 10 most irritating characters in movie history. Yeah, it's not just that, that he's an ugly man. Yeah, and looks count. It's his overacting. Yeah, I understand this is a farce, but he overacts, and that even good actors can do that. I'm trying to think of that famous farce that Cary Grant was in, the one with Raymond Massey, and it's about a murder, or about a series of murders, or a suspected series of Arsenic and Old Lace. Cary Grant in that is just unbearable, absolutely unbearable. But even Homer nods, as they say. I could see Ray Walston playing Kevin in a movie, says Anne Run. He was in The Apartment as well, and quite good in it. Yeah, he was a really obnoxious character, one of the middle managers who was bullying Jack Lemmon into, pimping out his apartment so the businessmen could carry on their squalid little affairs. And Ray Walston was the one who kept calling Jack Lemmon Buddy Boy. I just wanted to hit him. Kontiki realized, says, I went on a TV quiz show, crushed in the first round. I got to the semifinal, and they started asking about soap operas and celebrity nonsense. I at least managed to hit the buzzer and say sausages. There was an episode of King of the Hill where Bobby was going to, it was a big shock to everyone because Bobby gets picked to be on the, Haiku show, whatever they call it, Jeopardy, the quiz show, right? Bobby, he's a terrible student, right? Well, it turns out that Bobby knows an awful lot about pop culture, and those are the kind of questions that they ask on these quiz shows now. And it's quite amusing because Bobby, he thinks that he has to know absolutely everything about pop culture, and he starts watching all the shows, Hollywood Tonight, and buying all the magazines and all this, and he works himself into a nervous collapse. Very amusing. So I don't know much about Dean Martin, but recall in the Brat Pack movie with Ray Liotta and Joe Montana, he was portrayed as not being a womanizer. Oh, I don't know. Apparently he was really devoted to his wife, his first wife, and then his second wife, and then his third wife. It's very expensive, those kind of divorces. And not to mention, he had 8 children in all. Of course, there's people, Roger Daltrey has how many children? 9, 10? Wouldn't you kind of forget after a while which child was attached to which mother? Okay. So that's it. Roosh watched Kevin's review of his book. So what did he think? What did he think? Okay. So let's talk about what is coming. Well, in the book club tomorrow, it's the day after Canada Day, closest day to Canada Day. So I am discussing Desmond Morris's classic text, A Short History of Canada. July the 2nd being KMG Day, a day after Canada Day, it being my birthday. And on Theater Thursday next week, another American film, although this one made by an American, called The Florida Project, starring Willem Dafoe. On July 15th, another satire about the swinging 60s, but this is the other swinging 60s, the swinging 60s after Kennedy's assassination, after the British invasion and all that. It's by the great George Axelrod. It's called Lord Love a Duck. On July the 22nd, Max Ophüls' La Ronde. And on July 29th, one of the saddest movies ever made by Anders Weide, A Canal from 1957. So that is the show for today. Be back on the air today. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And if you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which would be greatly appreciated given my present circumstances, this limbo that I find myself in, my PayPal account is attached to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. You can think of it as a birthday present. If you're in Canada, donations can be made to the live stream directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.